Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining John and I for part one of our Giving Day webinar series. In today's webinar, we'll explore important questions and reasons for why Giving Day might be something that you, your institution, or your organization are considering. You might already be running an activity like this and might be looking for some possible further insight, and we do hope that we'll try to provide that for you today. But today's webinar is really all about setting your Giving Day up for success with a little bit of strategy and a little bit of goal setting and a little bit of simulation, all of which sits at the center of what we want to cover with you today. We do want to leave plenty of time for your questions at the end, so we'll just get started with a few introductions. So I'm Kat Carter, and I'm the Digital Fundraising Specialist and Head of Marketing here at Hubbub.
And I'm Jonathan May, Hubbub CEO, and today I'm going to be your resident data geek. 10 years ago, this whole digital fundraising thing was all a bit of an experiment for everybody, but no longer. And we're absolutely delighted to be talking to such a global audience who are just as excited about the potential and possibilities for Giving Days as we are here.
Absolutely. And really over the last year, John and myself have been fascinated by all the amazing Giving Days that have taken place all over the world. And really in that last year, things have really started to take shape all over the world. And we've even been lucky enough to be a part of some of these Giving Days, some of them being Queensland University of Technology in Australia, Said Business School here in the UK, in Oxford, and South Dakota State University in the US, who I think had a Giving Day yesterday. And I'm sure that went amazingly well for them. But with all of these Giving Days, many of which are being run for the very first time, comes a lot of learning around best practice and really excellent examples of success, which is what these webinars are all about. So let's get started. So before we dive into the strategy behind a Giving Day, I thought we'd just do a quick recap of what a Giving Day is. So a Giving Day is a 24 or 36-hour campaign that encourages a community of supporters to rally around a common cause. So 24 hours is quite common. However, 36 hours can create an opportunity for an institution or an organization to give their supporters more time to ease into the concept of a Giving Day. And it also extends the time available for the institution or organization to hit their desired goals. Giving Days are really reliant on a strong central case for support that focuses on the why and the impact of the donor's gift. They're also very much dependent on powerful email and influence from social ambassadors. And sometimes these last two can be a step change for institutions and organizations to make, as Giving Days do require a lot of content. And they require a lot of content because you'll be sending a lot of emails, perhaps making a lot of videos. Video is very key to Giving Days. And also creating a lot of case studies from the perspectives of multiple personas so that you have the opportunity to influence as many people as possible. They're also very much a massive team effort and involve all parts of fundraising, communications, and operations. And if you think about a Giving Day, it's very much, a fundraising campaign, but it's a sprint rather than a marathon. And as a result, the goals may change, and they might be smaller, and the themes might be more focused. But the same amount of team work and resource is definitely necessary for creating a successful Giving Day. And then finally, Giving Days work best when the full power of the institution really supports the activity. So again, this is very similar to a large-scale campaign where the buy-in from the very top of the organization or the institution is very key to gaining further support from both ambassadors, regular giving donors, and major donors. So Giving Days, really did get their start in countries like the US, and they have definitely become a staple in many fundraising strategies. They have changed the way that we think about activities such as direct mail and telephone and even email, and do bring a greater opportunity for institutions and organizations to reach out to more supporters through the power of engaging those social ambassadors. And the power of these social ambassadors is really what's paramount to Giving Day success. And they can really extend beyond the central institutions or organizations' reach to include others and encourage them to take part. And using examples that we've seen from the US, institutions in Europe and Australia are also starting to integrate Giving Days into their yearly activities, which is really great and very exciting as it enables them to encourage more non-donors to give than previously possible. And of course, we also have Giving Tuesday, which many use as a platform for creating interest in their own giving days. So one of the first things that you want to start to think about when you're looking at your Giving Day strategy is why a Giving Day? Why at this time is a Giving Day something you might want to consider? And I want to be really honest here, and right off the bat, want to take one option off the table, and that's making the decision to run a Giving Day because other institutions or organizations are doing them. And whether that's really for fear of being left behind or for not looking as innovative as others, or even just a little bit of FOMO, running a Giving Day because others are doing them usually isn't the best start to a robust strategy. So instead, you don't want to consider what's happening inside your own institution or organization with your current activities and how your desired segments may be performing or aren't performing, and where the opportunity for a Giving Day might take place. So perhaps a Giving Day makes sense because your direct mail or your telephone appeals aren't pulling the ROI that they used to. And the habits of our supporters are changing all the time. And what once was convenient might now be replaced with something that's even more convenient. It doesn't mean that your supporters are less passionate. It just means that their habits have changed. Or your more traditional fundraising activities might work for certain segments. Your current donors might respond well to telephone, and the phone is an excellent way to upgrade and retain those donors. It just doesn't happen to be the best for acquisition. And it might also be because the habits of our younger supporters have never been to speak to someone on the phone or respond to a direct mail about their philanthropic desires. So now you have two different activities or a series of different activities that work for many different audiences. And diversification of choice isn't really ever a bad thing. So think about, diversifying your fundraising activities in a similar way to companies like Coca-Cola. For years, the original Coca-Cola was the only product that, suited everyone's preferences. But then preferences changed and more brands came into the picture and people started to become more health conscious. So then came Diet Coke. Coca-Cola may have lost some of its customers to the original product or to other brands, but then they were able to bring them back by diversifying their range. And they really, continued to do that with products like Coke Zero and even Coke Energy. So different products for different preferences. And this doesn't just work for big companies like Coca-Cola or big products. This works in fundraising as well. So once you've settled on the reason for why you're running a Giving Day, one of the most important questions that you might want to ask is, what is your why? Giving Days rely on messages that really do demonstrate to the donor why their gift is important. And your donors want answers to questions that they have at the top of their mind when you get in touch to ask them about a gift. And this can really be, what impact will my gift make? How will my support help? And why now? These kinds of messages are, really warm and inviting. They also ignite and excite to bring people together under the premise of people like us do things like this, which is incredibly moving if done in the right ways. Your why creates the emotional response for why your supporters will choose to listen to your messages amongst all the other noise that you might be competing with. And these messages do take, the skeptic to the point of intrigue where they too make a gift to your Giving Day. So let's take a look at some of the examples of the different kinds of whys that you might use. So why is about impact, and another myth here to bust, which is what impact is not. So impact isn't about increasing donor participation or increasing income to the institution. Those are great KPIs or measures of success, but they are not a why. Instead, find the stories that demonstrate how your institution or organization changes lives. How does what you do help others to live better lives? Whether that's life-saving research, access to education, access to support services, or access to community resources. What's the story that you're going to tell that's going to demonstrate the impact that you make in the world? And this might be more familiar than you think. This approach is already used by large, well-known charities such as Comic Relief, Sport Relief, Stand Up to Cancer, and BBC's Children in Need. And it isn't because they are massive charities that their stories create impact. They are real, bold, and emotional stories that encourage people to stand together and to make a difference. And if you think about it, these examples are also essentially Giving Days themselves, just on a much larger scale. Next, you want to think about who your giving day is for. For our first giving day, you'll definitely want to choose audiences who are most likely to respond positively, and we call them the smallest viable audience. The reason why you want to choose the smallest viable audience is because giving days are very public campaigns, and one that doesn't appear to be a success will make future giving days that much more difficult to grow. And in the past, I've found it useful to ask myself the question, who's ready for an ask? For most of us, our current donors and our warm alumni or our members are our best audiences to start with. Your current donors are already bought into the idea, and many of them will give again to something that they already give to, showing others that their support matters. From here, you can also think about students, staff, parents, and the local community, depending on your organizational type. But again, these audiences will need to have some level of engagement before being asked proactively to be a part of a giving day. And if you do have different segments on your list who perhaps just aren't ready for a giving day ask, that's okay. You can use these individuals to warm up those segments and perhaps use them as an ambassador, warming up those segments for giving days in the future. So something that I like to use is this engagement funnel, and it really helps me to decide where somebody may sit or where a group of people may sit in terms of their readiness for an ask and what work I might need to do to move them down from engage to nurture to ask, and then obviously thanking them, and the kind of cycle continues. So at the top, you have those who are engaged in perhaps some way. Doesn't necessarily mean that they respond to your fundraising communications, and in fact, they probably don't. But they're very unlikely, perhaps, to make a gift at this time. They may also be unlikely to respond to an ask that's been sent on behalf of the organization or the institution, but perhaps my ambassadors are the people who can help influence those individuals and help increase their connection to the institution. Next, I have those in the nurture category who have been introduced to the idea of giving. So unlike engage, they have been introduced to giving, but they aren't yet bought into the idea. But they have little bits of engagement here and there, but they just haven't made a gift. So we might send them email campaigns and they open them and they click through, but they don't give. We might call them and they might say maybe, or they might make a pledge, but in fact, they don't give. And that's okay because perhaps it's the messages that we've been sending them, or perhaps the channel isn't their thing. So we want to find another way to encourage them to give, and that might be through Giving Day. These might also be longer lapsed donors who have lost touch with giving to the institution or organization, but they're still contactable. And again, a Giving Day might be a great opportunity for them to re-engage with us. Next, those in the ask and the thank categories are those ready for an additional or repeat ask. They could be donors who currently give and you feel really confident that they would make an additional gift, or they could be 1 or 2 year lapsed donors who are likely to give again. And a giving day is what they need to, encourage them to give. This process will need to start long before your giving day. And for many, I'm sure this is already a part of how you warm up your supporters to create engagement with them. So once you know what your why is and why you're going to focus on certain segments, the next thing to think about is what success looks like. And by success, I mean, what are the goals of your giving day? For some, the decision to run a giving day may be heavily dependent on ROI and what that looks like for the activity and how it's going to grow donor numbers over time. For others, goals might be about engagement and a starting point for engagement, with things like ROI and donor numbers being secondary factors. So a couple of tips for goals. They should definitely focus on participation over income. Giving days are all about the collective coming together to make a bigger difference. And if a giving day focuses too much on income, it can really make those giving at lower levels feel as if their gift doesn't matter. Your goals should definitely be your own. Again, it can be tempting to match or compete with other institutions who are similar to your own, but at the end of the day, your giving day should suit your needs and your objectives and nobody else's. They should be realistic, but slightly challenging. A goal that seems too easy to reach just has the opposite effect of what you want for your giving day. And it can really be discouraging to donors, and they feel that maybe perhaps their support isn't needed because your goal seems very easy, so somebody else will make that gift. So choose a goal that makes you feel both comfortable but challenged at the same time. And your goals don't always need to increase year on year. Increasing goals year on year for the first couple of years, 3 or 4 years, is great. It gets people to understand the idea, to understand the participation, and to kind of catch the spirit of giving days. But if priorities change, or a campaign finishes, or a campaign starts, at those times, do take the opportunity to reevaluate the reasons behind your giving day, and if goals also need to change as a result. And perhaps my biggest tip of all is that you need to look at choosing goals that are supported by data. Goals that are supported by data are more accurate, more reliable, and make your giving day its own. Creating a giving day based on your own data also gives confidence to the activity and the team running the activity. The team needs to know that their objectives are within reach, and if you support that by data, they'll feel that much closer to being able to complete those goals. It can also help to create more buy-in from those more senior roles concerned by the potential risk of running a giving day activity. So what data do you need? You want to look at the channels available. Are you just using email? Are you using social media? Will you be collecting all of the activities together and looking at email, social media, direct mail, and telephone? So that should give you your audience size. And if you understand what your audience size is, and you can look at previous response rates or benchmark response rates, these don't necessarily need to be your own response rates. They could be response rates of similar activities or similar institutions or organizations, and you can use those as a benchmark. And then the other thing you need to look at is ask amounts and average gifts. And from those two things, you should be able to demonstrate a potential donor goal and an income goal. I'm not going to go too much into that because that's what John's going to talk to us about next. But those are kind of the basics for what you need to start with when you're looking at data. Because again, planning a given day is a lot like planning a campaign. But it isn't just an activity for the regular giving team. Giving days do require the collective effort. We said this a couple of times, so I hope that's coming through. But at the top, you have your Majors Gift team who are helping to support Giving Day with larger donations that support matches and challenges. And then you do have the majority of the participation coming from regular giving and those individual giving levels that are going to bolster numbers. And then all of that is supported underneath by your ambassadors. And this can really be facilitated by a volunteer team or an alumni or constituent engagement team. And it really is a good solid foundation for building your giving day up from the bottom. And each of these levels have their own opportunity to influence the success of Giving Day. And missing just one of these can have a massive impact on the day's potential. And that's something that John's going to talk to us about next. So to look at a couple of simulations around giving days, I am going to turn it over to John. And he's going to look at a few different audience sizes, as well as what happens when we bolster the day's activity with influence from ambassadors, use effective storytelling, and add an engagement from major donors.
Thank you very much, Kat. So this is Jonathan May. Introduced myself at the start of the webinar, and I am going to talk to you about setting goals for both donors or for cash. Now, the first point I want to make is that for most people running their first giving day, there's a big degree of uncertainty in how they set their goals, how they set their targets, when thinking about things like match funding or challenges, how to actually compose the structure of those, as well as the actual numbers that you set. Well, the good news is that you don't have to pluck those numbers completely out of thin air, not even the first time you do it. Now, most of you who've run fundraising campaigns before, direct mail or any other kind of direct marketing campaign, will already be able to do channel analysis, looking at the conversion rates, the average gift sizes, and essentially build a little model. Let's say we have 5,000 people, 1% of them give. We now expect 50 of them to give. So you can do a simple analysis by just building up the expected conversion rates on different channels. But giving days themselves are a little bit different to conventional direct marketing because we have real-time donor challenges. Typically, we have match funding of some kind. And we may not have data for things like social media, for strong email campaigns, for ambassadors. And in addition, giving days have this concept of sort of social proof. So if one person has given, their friends are more likely to give as well. As a result, there are other approaches to modeling more of these kind of distributed, decentralized, sort of referral-based campaigns. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we might do that. At Hubbub, we've developed a Giving Day simulation tool, which involves running a probabilistic model of the day from a few hundred to a few thousand times for different scenarios. Now, what this does is to build up, based on your plan, your data, what you do know, and from wider sector data, where you don't know that data, build up a picture of what the likely outcomes are for Giving Day campaigns. So looking at kind of what channels you're intending to use, what the kind of distribution of giving amounts actually typically tends to be on those channels and what conversion rates you have. Looking at the structure of your challenge gifts and match funding gifts and how those interplay with the channels. And looking at ambassador programs and referred gifts. So when gifts have been triggered by either an ambassador or a donor or somebody sharing content. And from a starting plan, from a communications plan, we're able to then predict likely outcomes in a statistically robust way, giving you a distribution of sort of minimum, maximum, and the sort of most likely outcome in the middle. Equally, if we have some goals, some targets that we'd like to achieve, we're able to then work backwards and create a plan which is most likely to achieve those objectives. So this is immensely valuable when it comes to trying to work out when the right time is to run a day and what the kind of return on investment is likely to be, either in donor numbers or in money. So I'm going to talk through a couple of examples to show you what kind of things we can do here. So the first of them is a relatively small college or a school running with a single campaign theme, with quite a small email list, 7,500 people, on an assumption that around 1% of them give. So that's low average for the sector as a whole across the giving days we've seen. Running with about 50 ambassadors and running with typical sort of social media profiles, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 odd followers across a couple of different networks. On giving days, we tend to see gift sizes around £50. So we're going to anchor the gift sizes to £50 and vary them slightly based on prior data. So with this kind of structure of a giving day, we're able to then simulate that giving day hundreds or thousands of times and start to predict the likely outcomes. And here are the results. It's likely that a giving day with those criteria will produce somewhere between, £5,000–6,000 worth of income. We can also run this in multi-currency. It's worth saying this is not solely in British pounds. Very happy to run this in euros or dollars, but or any other currency for that matter. But between about £5,000 and £10,000, you can see the peak there at around £8,000 worth of income, and somewhere in the region of 100 to 150 odd donors, peaking at around 130. So those are the most likely outcomes for that kind of structure day. Now let's see what happens if we add in match funding of £5,000, three challenges of £1,000 each, perhaps challenges for donor numbers or challenges for particular participation goals or from particular areas or types of donor. Let's see what happens to the overall performance of that day, keeping everything else constant. And these are the results. So we have gone from the kind of £8,000 mark in giving to somewhere around 17,500, maybe up to £20,000 worth of cash. And our donor numbers have gone from somewhere in the region of 130 odd. Most likely here we're peaking somewhere between 150 and 200 odd donors. Example number 3, going to use a typical UK university here. So looking at a giving day which comprises 3 overall themes, comprises a fairly substantial email list, about 75,000 people, again sticking with that 1% sector average conversion rate, looking at about 100 ambassadors for the campaign, and typical university level social media, which is somewhere in the region of 50,000 to 100,000 followers on social media. Gift sizes, again, looking at kind of sector averages, somewhere in the region of 50 to 100 pounds, picked 75, and varying that by channel based on, again, prior data. And with a fairly substantial match funding pot, £25,000 of match funding for the day, and 3 £10,000 challenges. This produces the following results. The amount is likely to be in the range of 120 to 150,000, peaking at about 130,000. And we're looking at somewhere in the region of 900, 950 donors for that day. And some of you may be wondering what happens if we run a multi-channel campaign. So what happens if we add in addition to that day, direct mail, phones, stuff we currently do, kind of building up that annual giving, building the annual giving program around a focus on a particular day or week worth of activity. So now we're going to simulate the same giving day, but adding in a small direct mail campaign and a relatively small phoning campaign. And as you can see, that pushes your donor numbers up, 950 to 1,000. It's a little higher. The distribution is further to the right. And the financial targets have, of course, gone up a little bit too, looking like we get somewhere in the region of 145 to 160,000 pounds worth of gifts on that day. So what I've been trying to sort of explain here is that we can take all of this guesswork out of return on investment, out of planning the day itself, out of sort of worrying about whether or not this is worthwhile right now. This is the kind of data that will help you make decisions about whether this is right for you now. Typically, you can see that there can be an enormous range to financial outcomes and donor outcomes based on your plans. And by modeling a few different scenarios, you're able to get a report and get a proper understanding of what the likely outcomes are going to be. This also helps you understand how to set the targets, but not just targets for the day itself, but also for things like challenges and match funding. In some of the earlier examples, we saw that the actual financial targets for the day, the financial outcomes were likely to be quite low, so 8,000 to 10,000 type pounds. If you were to create a match funding pot, which was £25,000 on a day that probably will only raise 8,000, you're going to end up with large amounts of that match funding pot not used. So it will help you kind of inform how best to use match funding, challenge funding, or other major gifts you secure in advance of the day. It'll also help you understand what happens if you add in other channels or improve things like email conversion rates. And finally, I think it'll help you request a plan from us to hit particular preset goals. So this is one of the other things we can do. If you know you really, really need 225 donors for a particular day, and you have a few constraints around the structure of the day, we're able to show you what kind of performance on what kind of channels you're going to need to achieve to get there, and then help you work towards those goals and objectives. After the webinar, we're going to distribute a link to the form. If you want to play with this simulator, you want us to run some data through for you and help you make an assessment of your potential donor or financial return on investment, or just explore some scenarios associated with the organization, we're very, very happy to, and there'll be a link distributed afterwards. So now I'd like to hand back to Kat. There are some incredibly important and interesting and exciting bits in the following section. So over to you, Kat.
Thanks, John. So just before we get to the Q&A, there are 2 more things to consider in your giving day. And the first of which is when. And my answer back to the question of when you should run your giving day is dependent on when resources are available for your giving day to make it the best opportunity for success. And those resources are really around things that we have already covered, but I do just want to mention them again because they are important. So things like people power, so the staff and the collective team that are on board for your giving day. Giving days really do take a village because they take a lot of effort to make them great, but they are more successful and even more rewarding when everyone is on board. You might need to look at budget. So you may have a budget to run Giving Day, and that's great. It's a whole separate line item budget, and for a lot of people, that is the way that they recommend running Giving Days. It has its own budget. But you also may need to reevaluate your current budget to see where allowances can be made. If you're bringing in a Giving Day to replace a telephone or a direct mail activity, then you may be able to use some of the budget from that to then use on your Giving Day. And you might also need to have conversations separately with more senior colleagues about more budget, which may be a conversation that requires time and planning for it to be successful. And then giving days should be planned with ample amounts of time. Our recommendation for a giving day is a maximum of 6 to 8 months and a minimum really of 3 months. Any shorter in the activity can feel rushed, and it's much more stressful than it needs to be. And then finally, again, is engagement. And going back to that question about who's included in your giving day, you may need time to warm up those certain audiences and giving levels before you commit to doing a giving day. And then finally, what happens after Giving Day? What happens to your donors and your ambassadors? What does their supporter journey look like before, during, and after Giving Day? I'd imagine that this isn't a one-time opportunity for them to make a gift or for them to be engaged. So what's the next engagement or ask opportunity for each of these segments? Be mindful of their journey and keep the messages of impact and support front and center of their mind, even when Giving Day has finished. And then think about how this activity might change the habits of your donors. You might find donors who now prefer digital to telephone or post, or donors who prefer to give only on Giving Day because they like the excitement and being a part of that large activity is very exciting for them. And then this rolls into how Giving Day might change the structure of your program. As Jan said, lots of institutions are now bringing all their fundraising activities together, centered around Giving Day. Sending out direct mail and running telephone appeals at the same time as Giving Day really does create an opportunity to bolster each of those activities into one collective effort around yearly giving. And then finally, what does Giving Day year 2, 3, or 4 look like? This isn't to say that you need to have a full strategy for the following years, but an initial visualization can really help to understand how that activity might grow and build over time. Hi, everybody. Kat here. So I really hope that you enjoyed the first part of the webinar so far. And what we really hope at this point is that that's hopefully prompted some questions from those of you who are here today.
Great. And this is Jonathan. Whilst you think through your questions, we're very happy to answer them. I wanted to make a couple of quick comments. So we noticed that there are quite a few nonprofits in attendance. And you'll have noticed that there was quite a bit of a focus on the session on schools, colleges, universities. The advice we've given holds just as true for nonprofits as it does for the education sector institutions. And a quick note, the simulator will work absolutely for nonprofit use cases too. It's all about doing the audience channel and messaging, thinking and analysis, whatever your type of organization. The second point I just want to make is we also believe that we have South Dakota State University on the line, who did their Giving Day yesterday and secured, as of roughly 6 a.m. this morning, UK time, $1.3 million in gifts from 3,475 donors, which is an incredible achievement. So I just wanted to say well done to South Dakota State University for that amazing achievement.
Oh, we have a question. So this one says, and it's from Kate. So it is, can you give us some examples of how we might approach getting match funding and how this might work? So great question there, Kate. And yes, we can give you some examples. So when you're looking at match funding, it's good to have your kind of donor pyramid for the Giving Day. Is essentially it is that campaign structure, and to really understand what it might be that you'll look to achieve from that regular giving audience, and perhaps using that as a starting place. As John said when he was looking at the simulator, you can look and see how much you might expect from that regular giving audience, and if they're only going to bring in around £8,000 or $8,000, then having a match gift of 25 may seem a little steep, and it might not get used, and that could, have an interesting dynamic on the giving day. So once you kind of have a rough number of what you might expect from that kind of regular giving audience, and maybe a little uplift from social media and ambassadors, then you can kind of look to maybe match that or slightly increase what that kind of total is. So if you think you're going to get 8K from your regular giving and kind of ambassadors, then maybe you look for a match of 10K, because increasing that match to 10K might bolster the response from that regular giving audience to 10K itself. And you want to kind of give people things to reach for, and that's what those matches and challenges are for. So once you have that amount, the next thing to do is to think about how you want to use those matches and challenges, and almost create a shopping list to say, we're going to have an overall match of 10K, but perhaps we're also going to have a couple of challenges. So reaching critical points in the day, so halfway there, or all of our donor numbers have been reached. You may do certain communities around challenges. So if we have a certain number of alumni, or a certain number of members, or a certain number of parents donating, but anything that people can kind of contribute to in real time that's motivating to them. And once you have that shopping list and you know how much you need, then you can take a look at your prospect pool. So those major donors who are in that pool, and you then can go to them and say, we really want you to be a part of Giving Day. Here are the things that we think, would be really, things that people would respond to on Giving Day. And we think that you're, the right person to provide that match or that challenge. So, think about the numbers, create a shopping list, think about the donors who might want to be engaged with that, and then go and make those asks.
Okay, the second question we have is from Margaret, and it's, can your model take into consideration upcoming events that may affect Giving Days, i.e. Brexit? What a wonderful question. Perhaps the first thing I'd say is that if anybody could model what was going to happen at Brexit, we'd all be in better shape. I think the answer is sort of yes and no. We don't have any data that will tell us what Brexit is going to do to our giving programs. So if we had that data, absolutely, we could. That said, there are some reasonable assumptions we could make about some of the possible impacts of Brexit. So it might do some damage to some of our European giving constituencies, for example. And as a result, we might be able to adjust either the conversion rates for a certain subset of our audience, or adjust the giving levels. Of course, it's kind of interesting, because you could actually increase the average gift size for a European audience, because it's likely, if they're giving in euros, that a fairly significant Brexit will collapse the pound. So you might want to actually increase your average giving amount for a bit, but maybe decrease the conversion rate. So the model is totally tolerant of any sort of reasonable assumption you want to make about the effects. It's not very good at predicting unpredictable events. So I think it's sort of, if you've got an ability to create a reasonable change, a reasonable impact on conversion rates or ask amount, then absolutely the model will be able to predict it. And we're able to run several different scenarios as well. So you can say, well, if I assume this parameter goes up or down by 5 or 10%, what happens? It's quite capable, and it's quite easy to test multiple scenarios.
Great. So another question here from Amy, and please do keep your questions coming. So John and I love answering questions, and we have about 20 minutes left in the webinar, so plenty of time to answer questions. So one here from Amy, and it says, what do you think the difference would be for UK institutions compared to US ones? So again, great question. So for me, the comparison really is that conversation about giving and the culture around giving that I really think is the difference. And I think that U.S. institutions are very good at talking about their culture of giving, and have almost gotten it to the point where they don't need to tell such emotive stories anymore. It's still very important, and they still need to do it. SCSU had an excellent example of a video for their Giving Day yesterday that really led with impact, and then followed right through to what a Giving Day is and how people can get involved. But they've gotten to that point through a lot of hard work and a lot of storytelling and a lot of demonstrations about what giving means and what impact means. And some of the results in the simulation are accountable to that storytelling. So are you going to be telling great stories? And if you don't, how might that affect your Giving Day and its results? So that I would really say is the biggest difference. And once we start telling those stories here in the UK and anywhere else in the world, and getting people familiar with the culture of giving and the impact that they can make, and those real human stories, then it will almost become second nature to people to think about giving as soon as they think about the institution.
Okay, the next question from Kate. Thank you. I hope to use a Giving Day to embed a culture of giving with our alumni, which is currently non-existent. How would you suggest we go about warming alumni up to giving prior to a Giving Day? I think we both might have something to say on this one, but I think I will. I'll start with a couple of things that immediately occur to me about this. So, the first thing is that I think if you go back to that slide that Kat mentioned, Kat showed earlier around how planning a Giving Day is a bit like planning a campaign. Think like a traditional capital campaign. A Giving Day is an opportunity to bring the entire community together around a particular message or theme or focus. And I think the first question I would have is the first comment I would have is, let's find the theme that unites people around a cause, and that very much depends on the institution. But if you can find that message, something that resonates with both the alumni or the audiences that you're talking to, as well as the internal, the team, the staff, and anybody else connected with the organization. It doesn't have to necessarily be something of enormous strategic value. It just has to be something that really starts to resonate with people. And then two other small comments on that. It's pretty rare that you can come up with that concept without some testing. So the suggestion I would make around that is to pick some small segments of your alumni and test that cause, that theme with them by email, social, or pick the phone up, talk to them about the kinds of things you're thinking about doing, and see if that campaign, that cause, that theme really starts to resonate with them. And then finally, for me, in the run-up to a Giving Day, you get the opportunity to start communicating more broadly with your constituent base, with your alumni base, about the day itself. A Giving Day isn't something that you kind of, don't say anything about and then launch with a bang. It's something you build up to through 2 or 3 different ways. So everybody needs to know it's coming, so they're ready. But you're also going to be asking people to become part of the team, to join the campaign as ambassadors for it. And so as a result, during the 2-3 months leading up to the day, you get the chance to talk about that campaign, the thing that really matters, with some of the potential ambassadors within each segment of your alumni base. So there's a way of kind of starting to get people used to receiving those digital comms, understanding the message, and taking some kind of action to represent, retell, and promote that kind of message. So Kat, I don't know if you had anything else to add here or that you wanted to say.
I think, it's just, again, the kind of storytelling and the impact and really demonstrating that. So one of the things that I did when I was at Southampton was got giant tags and placed them all around the university. And we had a kind of a tagging campaign. And we also had an alumni reunion along, a similar kind of time. And as our alumni came onto campus, who didn't really have a great culture of giving at the time, they started to see these tags all over campus. But then we started to use those tags and talk about them on social media, and talk about the donors who were making those gifts and making those things possible. We chose things that came from major gifts, but also things that came from regular giving, and really started to try and demonstrate and tell the stories of, where is giving impacting things on campus, whether it be a student, a physical building, or an activity on campus. What are the things that are making a difference to show people, those demonstrations of success. But it wasn't just us telling that story. We got our donors to tell their story and, tell others why they thought that giving was important to them, why it might be important to others, and then to, make a call to action around giving. And that's just kind of one example, but just using those examples of storytelling really helped our alumni to understand that it was something that was important, it was something that we wanted them to think about, and it was something that we wanted them to contribute to as well. So, tell those stories, really show them the demonstration of impact at any opportunity. Something that can be sometimes a challenge is getting, your comms team to talk about giving, or the alumni team to talk about giving on their social channels, and try and get them to be encouraged by those activities, because they're just great news stories. And if people can see those great news stories, then they are, much more likely to give. And if they hear stories from other people, that's the other thing. If they can hear somebody else, saying those messages, and they feel like that person is very similar to themselves, then, that will encourage them to give as well. Great. So if you have any other questions, please do send them through. We have about 10 minutes left. But one of the questions that we sometimes get asked in the kind of, who should we include in this giving day? And everybody kind of shoves everybody in there. Their students, their staff, their parents. And sometimes the question back is, have you talked to these people about giving? Are they aware? So where on this kind of sliding scale of engagement do they sit? Because, it does benefit you to perhaps not talk to a group of people about Giving Day because they really aren't ready. So this could be, really common with groups like students and staff where there is no culture of giving. And, as of yet, they haven't responded well, to the opportunity. And that's okay. But if you can use Giving Day to show them, the demonstration of impact, but not make them a priority and not really concentrate on any of resource. And I think that's the thing here to kind of think about is that resource is not being spent on audiences that are going to be very hard to convert. Spend your resource on audiences that are going to be easier to convert. So if you can, demonstrate success to those individuals, and even maybe use some of those who are, really much on board, to those students in key positions or staff who are always at your events and always say great things, use them as ambassadors the first time round, and really get them demonstrating the opportunity for impact and the opportunity for success. And, you can then hope to build those connections for the next Giving Day to say, okay, we had a really good opportunity to integrate our students and our staff as ambassadors in our first Giving Day. We weren't really looking for them to give. We just wanted them to become ambassadors, maybe share a couple of things. And they've done that. And we've also done some other things around campus to demonstrate impact of giving, and people have been responding. So in year 2, now I'm going to spend the time and the energy and the resource to look at those audiences as well as the others, and then keep building that over time. But don't think that you have to include all of those audiences all at once in your very first Giving Day. Really do just look at those who might be the easiest to engage.
Okay, we have another question in from Shana. How do you choose ambassadors, and who are they? This is a really interesting question. So if you go back to the comment I made earlier about how to sort of engage very unengaged communities, there typically are, within any alumni or general audience for an organization, a group of people who will much more quickly engage with an ask, a concept. Effectively, they have this underlying affinity and passion for something either associated with the organization or for the cause or the story that you're actually trying to get out there as part of something like a Giving Day. They may only be a fairly small percentage of your audience, but they are those who are most likely to become ambassadors. So on the one hand, I would say that to an extent, they sort of self-select. If you were to make an ask broadly of everybody, they are the people that are most likely to click the button and say, yes, I'd love to be an ambassador. From the other side, the question is, who make the best ambassadors? Who should we go out and ask? And so I think one of the best ways to do this is to think about, okay, so when we try to sort of work out what kind of person makes a good ambassador, we're asking the question: who has the time, the interest, and the influence to actually be able to really push messages out for us, to not just sort of say that they're happy to help, but actually proactively go and help us fundraise, to spread our message, and to make asks of friends and other people in their networks. Although I give you a little example of what I mean there. Although celebrities in theory might make fantastic ambassadors from a brand point of view, they rarely make an awful lot of difference to campaigns, because they typically don't have the kind of the time and the commitment to any particular school, college, university, or charity to repeatedly keep talking about something like a giving day. So the people that typically make the most difference are people who are well respected, quite trusted, regular people, and so people who engage regularly on social media, because that's one of the key things you're going to be asking ambassadors to do: share and talk about the campaign that you're running. We have developed at Hubbub some tools that will help you find ambassadors within your audiences. So they can do a little search through some of your social media profiles and some of the data that you have to help identify people who fit these criteria. They are trusted, reasonably influential, not really celebrities, but reasonably influential, and quite active on social media. So if you get a bit stuck, it's something that we can absolutely help with in terms of identifying people.
Yep. And we will also be having a webinar later on in this webinar series about ambassadors. So make sure to look out for that, and I'll give the exact dates at that when we're done with the Q&A. Any other final questions, burning questions to ask before we wrap things up? A couple more moments. No. Okay, well, if you find yourself driving home or on the walk home or over the weekend thinking about something and you wanted to kind of ask it of us, you'll get our emails in the follow-up communications from today's webinar, and feel free to send us an email. So just before we wrap things up, we do have 3 more webinars in this webinar series. So we'll have one about creating dynamic communication plans that drive results, and that will be with Marie Rose, who's our customer success manager here at Hubbub. We'll also have one that's evaluating and analyzing your Giving Day results, something that I'm very excited to talk about with Lewis Clayton, who's our commercial director here at Hubbub. And then we will be doing a webinar about creating engaged ambassador communities, where we'll really dive into how you create those engaged communities to help bolster the results of your Giving Day, and dates there at the bottom. But again, there'll be a link in the follow-up email about those webinars, and you can register at any time. So if that's all the questions that we have today, the final thing today to say is just a massive thank you to everyone who registered, who attended. Thanks so much for your attention today. We hope that you have a great rest of your Friday and a lovely weekend. Anything else, John?
No, nothing from me. Thank you all very much. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Bye.